hello to everyone and welcome everyone who is joining us today's discussion called Right to Inhabit, Rethinking, Inhabiting through Artistic and Spatial Practices. My name is Santiago Peluffo Soneyra. I am co-director at Latin Elephant, and I'm joined by three talented minds who will I present in a minute, and also joined by my colleagues at Latin Elephant, Joselyne Contreras, who actually runs this series of events and is the curator of the public program, and Natalia Perez, who's also co-director at Latin Elephant. For those who are perhaps joining us for the first time, quickly, Latin Elephant is a London-based UK charity promoting participation of migrant and ethnic communities in processes of urban change in London, in particular, the focus in Latin Americans in the UK. And one of the several ways in which we do the work to promote this engagement is through the arts. So we're here presenting one of the many activities we are carrying out as part of this special program called Inhabiting Spaces. And we think, well, personally think this conversation is particularly important to us as an organization, since for the past 6 years or so, we have been campaigning against gentrification and for more inclusive development in Elephant and Castle. That, as you might know, is home to the Latin Americans in the UK. This is the art public program that Latin Elephant has been putting together in the past 2 years, 2021 and 2022, together with Gasworks, South London Gallery and TATE, and is funded by the Arts Council. It consists of a series of cultural activities to enable access, explore creativity, and increase participation in arts by Latin American communities in the UK. Hopefully, you've been following our previous conversations, talks, discussions during the Work in Disobedience from Latin America, which was a platform on colonialism, anti-colonialism, and decolonialism. And if not, well, a special welcome to those joining us for the first time. Today, we're going to have a conversation and discussion for the next 90 minutes or so with three talented individuals who have done extensive work on areas such as urban memory, gentrification, and the real estate business. Three artists, activists, and researchers who have recently been together in London, and as part of this program, today are joining us from three different parts of the world. I guess that's the power of the internet and the pandemic as well. I don't really like presenting people, so I'll just briefly say that I'm joined today by Carolina Illanes, Chris Jones, and Felipe Lanuza. Carolina, Chris, and Felipe, thank you very much for being here today. They will now tell us about their work, which is centered, among other things, on the use of images, sound, projections, and evidence to address the effects that certain issues and phenomena, such as gentrification, for instance, have on people and places. Each of them will share with us their thoughts and their practices, and we'll then have an open discussion. And of course, there'll be space for questions. So if you have the will to participate, save your questions or just put them on the chat, and we hopefully have a very interesting discussion and conversation. So let's kick off with Carolina, who is a visual artist and researcher, today joining us from Santiago de Chile, and has been very recently presenting her installation at the TATE and reflecting about gentrification processes in Elephant Castle, joined by Chris, I believe. So we're now recording. Carolina, we're all ears.
Thank you, Santiago, for the presentation. Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for this occasion. To Chris and to Felipe, it's a really nice opportunity to share about, our relation to inhabiting, all the memories that we have to, our culture and our cities and our neighborhoods. So yes, I'm really glad. And well, as you said, Santiago, I would like to focus in this work that you mentioned, which is this workshop that I did on March of this year in TATE. But first of all, I would like to start talking a little bit about my work to set up the context in which this work takes place. So I'm going to share, I have to share my presentation. I think that.
Sure, maybe Jose can help us enabling that.
Yes, to habilitate, yes.
You are co-host, Carol. It should work.
Okay. Yes, it works. Okay. Do you see the presentation? Yes? Okay. So as I said before, I would like to start sharing a little bit about my work. I'm a visual artist, and lately I'm also a researcher, but I think that I haven't been in the researching path for a long time. So I believe that I'm mainly an artist and also a citizen. I have lived all my life in Santiago. Santiago is a city with that has a lot of urban transformations that happens like really, really fast. And also, as you may know, it's a city where it's a country where we have a lot of earthquakes. So all these aspects make that it's a city that is constant changing, is shifting all the time. In such a fast way that we have, I think, that a problem to process all those changes. So I think that my work has focused on exactly that, to process, to create like devices and I don't know, artistic devices that allow to an participant, an audience, to experience these urban transformations in another way. So, sorry, yes. So, starting from my work, my artistic work that I have been working on like many years now, my work has always focused on these urban transformations. I work mostly with cardboard and paper, very light and fragile and fleeting materials. I think that I'm really interested in the poetics of these materials, how those materials can change all of a sudden, for example. And also, the poetics of these materials comes from the fact that are the materials that, for example, architects use to project. So I'm always projecting in a very unorthodox way, maybe, and I use different techniques that comes from the printing, for example, the printing universe. For example, the use of reams of paper with die cuts, or the use of the techniques of pop-up books or bricolage. So I use different kinds of techniques each time for each work, that many of them use these do-it-yourself kinds of techniques. And also I use a lot of architectural resources as well. I like to focus on patterns. For example, I was telling to Chris a moment ago, I have a long research addressed to fences, because fences, for example, are a very it's an element, an urban element that reflects Chilean landscape, and I think that maybe even Latin American landscape. And also, I think that it's an element that embodies the way that Chilean culture addressed to public space, for example, or the way that we relate between each other. So it's always a relation that is of estrangement, for example. I think that we have in our bodies all those 17 years of dictature that we were not allowed to go freely on the public space, for example. So we still have this with us, and we think that public space is something to be afraid of, and also other people is something to be afraid of. And then after dictature, all those years of neoliberalism economy that sees, state housing policy as a commodity. So all those issues is that the issues that address my work. Sorry, I have a problem to pass to the others. Sorry. So it's in this context that in 2017 I started this research, which is placed in my neighborhood, and it focused on 5 houses that were demolished after the year 2012. These 5 houses are not really important houses. They are not inscribed in history. They don't belong to, for example, a huge project that it was important in the government of some president, for example. These are 5 houses. The 5 are really different between each other, and they were demolished and no one cared really. But the important thing is that they were demolished, and is a reality it's an everyday reality in my neighborhood since the year 2006, when they built here the first metro station and the capital gains increased. So the research is focused on evidences. So I didn't want to study or make an inquiry of houses that were half demolished. I wanted to do an inquiry through evidence when the house doesn't exist anymore and you only have the remainings. I didn't want to also to interview, for example, the residents of these houses. I wanted to base my study only in these remains. And the remains, the main remains of these houses are 2. One is the photographic record that we can find in Google Street View that show you like different pictures of, one street, for example, and then you can see urban changes, which is amazing because it's a place that safeguard, urban memory, like any other place. It's really something special. And on the other hand, you have all the documents, all the architectural drawings that are safe, kept on the municipality. All this is in a file. So I based all the research on these 2 types of evidence. So when I encountered the first file of the first house, what I see is a material that for me was a little bit striking because it was like to find the remains of someone that died. For example, I don't know if you have this experience, but I have a little box where I keep all the old documents of my grandfather that I never met him, for example. And I always do this exercise of taking all those documents to unfold these documents to observe in a way that I believe that those documents will allow me to get to know him. So here I think that I did exactly the same ritual. So the first thing that I did was to obviously to read all those documents, but for me it was also interesting not only to read all those documents, but also to question, to analyze these things with my hands. So there is a connection between get to know something in the hands, to feel the paper, to feel even the smell, all the and to watch not only the information, but also another type of information like the stamps or the scratches or the signatures or the handwriting or the tracks and traces and marks that were on these different documents. And all these traces talk about a person and the inscription of a person. So it talks also about time. I also study and analyze, the way that these documents are folded. And with all this information, I began to do many translations, we could say. So those are translations from, for example, a language which is legal, which is in a way cold. It's a cold language, ciphered language, into a graphic display that can be more haptic, maybe. I didn't include those pictures in this presentation because if not, then it's going to be too long. But I did many experiments with these things, and also, for example, with all the architectural drawings. I did all other type of translations that were, for example, more spatial. So what I wanted to do and what I'm doing actually still is to create another type of archive. So you have this archive that is, I would say, a little bit cold to another archive that can transmit, can address to a participant or a spectator in a sensitive way, in a phenomenological way too. So it's in this context of this research that I went to London for 3 months in an internship at the Visual Culture Department at Goldsmith University. And I encountered this urban transformation that was taking place at Elephant and Castle. And I met Joselyne Contreras, who invited me to participate in Right to Inhabit. And for me, it was really a really nice opportunity to see another neighborhood that was encountering the same gentrification problem. So with Joselyne, we went to the commercial center, for example. So I met, this commercial center. I even had an interview there with my professor, like in the Bodeguita. Bodeguita was the name, no? Really nice place. And then I came back on this year in March to do this work at TATE. So the first question that arises when I was, investigating this neighborhood was why there are some architectures, some dwellings that last for a very long time, and others that last like very short time. So it's a very basic elemental question, but it says a lot about housing politics, for example. It can say a lot about culture, how long a building, for example, stands in the surface of the city. So I began to read about Highgate State, and for me it was very, striking to learn that this huge council estate was demolished, that in that place that I was walking around existed these huge buildings, this huge project. And for me, it was striking because I get to know another project here in Chile that is very, very similar, that it was built in the 60s. It's the Villa Portales that Felipe knows very well. where I used to go very often because one of my dear friends used to live there. So it's a place where I spent quite a long time. And it has the same characteristic, like high path, you know, a project that contemplates all the people, all the groups of people that live in a city, families, single people, the elderly, etc. So what I get to know about this council estate was actually a really nice place, and so I began to wonder why this council estate lasts for less than 40 years. So it's a really short time, and so time, I think that is something really important to analyze things, not only analyze things only by the material structure or, you know, the project. You know, when time and space appears also life, the lit space, which is, it cannot be enclosed by the material dimension. You know, the lit dimension is another thing. So what it was lost here it wasn't only you know, concrete blocks. It was really what was lost. It was a very very rich tissue of social tissue, we called it in Spanish, un tejido social, you know, very rich of people that work in community. So I took these pictures from Google Street View, and it's very different from Chile because here in London, as it's a very known capital, you don't have two photographs. You have like 10 different records of in different times. Google Street View started in 2009, I think, in this city. So here you can see the transformation. And then I took this, well, this comes from the Southern Local History Library that shows these other images when Highgate State was being built. And then you can see there was another council estate before. So it's really like all these layers of different architectures that, you know, one replaced to the other. This reminds me to Felipe's work when he works with palimpsest, for example, to talk about time and memory, which is, I found it very nice. So these were all the old council estate. So when I began to think of what to do for this workshop, the first thing that I thought about is I wanted to rebuild a space that no longer exists. And what is the meaning of this, to rebuild a space that no longer exists? So what I rebuilt, it was one of the apartments or in one of the blocks of Highgate State that was the one-person flat. The one-person flat was addressed to the elderly. You know, it was an apartment for one person of 36 square meters. So to see the floor plan of an architecture for me is like, in a way, it's like the DNA of a dwelling. So you can rebuild the spatial layout. And then when you rebuild the spatial layout, you can have an experience, you know, with your body. what is the relation of your body with the space, for example, with the length of this space, if it's too narrow, if it's wide, you know. So you get to know the place in a different way, not in an intellectual way or a rational way. It's really a phenomenological way that for me is really important. And to do this, I chose to create these sort of bricks made of paper. But these are not the bricks, you know, the usual bricks that we encounter in many of the British architecture. It's not the small brick made of clay. This is the concrete brick. And we could say that it's a block really, it's not a brick. So this brick for me is really important in the relation with the hand. So again, the hands. Bricks had a really, really long history. So I think that the first brick was made like 10,000 years before Christ. They have like the first bricks, and it was made for, you know, to fit on the hands, to be able to build something with the hands. So I thought that this was really a good object, a good material to get to know this spatial layout with the body. I don't know how much long, so 5 minutes. So I'm 5 minutes since like 3 minutes ago, no, Santiago? Yes. Okay, so I'm going to do it fast. So what I did is in this workshop, I invite people to create their own layouts. You know, these were bricks that they were not glued, so you can move them around like a sort of a Lego, but in a human scale. It was like a sort of a game, really. And also this ritual of creating or building a space inside or another space. So, and also I did a presentation of my research in Chile, like searching for connection between one neighborhood that was going through this gentrification problem in this neighborhood in London that was in the same, in the same problem. So at the end, all these places, I think, of gentrification are connected through housing policy that it was really built in the same moment. I don't know if you know that this book of Raquel Rolnick that is called The War of Places. So she worked for the United Nations, and she says at the beginning of the 90s, really the housing politics changed. So they said to each government that they shouldn't facilitate housing. They shouldn't provide housing, but they should facilitate to governments to create this real estate business. So at the end, all these neighborhoods are in all this gentrification context were born in the same period, I think, where all the worldwide politics change. So yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolina. That was very interesting, and there's a lot of things. I took several notes around mostly urban memory. Obviously, the Haygate brings about a lot of questions and issues. But now we'll hopefully have that discussion after Chris and then Felipe have their presentation. So we'll hear now from Chris very quickly. Well, as a person that I know quite a lot, so we have marched and campaigned together for a couple of years in Elephant and Castle. Yeah, Chris he does many things. I don't know, Chris, introduce yourself and tell us about your work.
Thank you, Santiago. Thank you to everyone for sorting all this out, and for everyone for speaking, everyone for attending. That's wanted to say I appreciate that. So I have 15 minutes to go through some things. Carolina's great. There's some correspondences between both her work and what she's outlined around the Haygate estate in the Elephant and Castle. And we'll see that as we go. It's a bit of a rant, what I have to say. My name is Chris. I've lived in the Elephant and Castle for about 30 years, so I have a very strong attachment to that neighbourhood. And as you can hear, it's a neighbourhood that could be completely transitioned from the kind of older working class neighbourhood, the Haygate estate, 3,000 kind of working class council tenants, and the shopping centre, which Carolina alluded to too, which has also now been demolished. So it's like a huge hole in both my memory of that landscape and my experiences there, but also for that working class community there, without getting into all the kind of psychological and physical effects of displacement, but that's what we're talking about. So there's a very heavy history there. I like to think of the heavy history of the Elephant and Castle. The elephant is heavy, a castle is heavy. And so we are attached to our own heavy histories there. I'm not going to say too much about myself. As Santiago said, I'm someone who has many hats in the sense of being a long-term local. I'm involved in a anarchist social centre there that has a huge archive as well. Similarly to what Carolina was talking about, we have a lot of paper. We have a lot of paper, particularly around the Haygate. We have a lot of paper around particular struggles, international struggles around the world. And there is something about that paper and that collection, just like witnessing, a holding of stuff, sifting through stuff, making a claim. I think we're making a claim with this access to history we're providing. But there's something true about just like literally touching a bit of paper that someone else has produced as part of an investment in struggle, an investment in resistance to these changes, to displacement, to the kind of lack of dignity that is being thrown upon people. So the kind of work I've been doing there is being very active in campaigns. That's probably as much as I can say about that. Just being a campaigner, being part of struggles, making posters, going on demonstrations, doing research. But I also write about the area and I live in that area. So it's a very kind of practical poetics. And this is the kind of approach I decided to take today. And you'll see that there are these correspondences between Felipe and Carolina and our work, or the things, how we think about things. Okay, just going to keep an eye on the time. So I decided to show you things instead of, this says property one possession. This is the first thing I'm going to talk about. Okay, and it was very interesting to think. The last thing Carolina said was about the floor plan of the Haygate estate. And when we were talking in a cafe there, I was reminded of something I did with people in a project called Living School, which was quite spontaneous. And it's around the notion of occupation when people occupy empty buildings. Thanks. And I am someone who's a former squatter, and I was someone who helped occupy the Haygate estate against its demolition. And so I was asked to present some stuff around occupation, around self-build and things like that. And I had been involved in a squatted social centre in London called the Black Frog. It was in Camberwell, and there was a whole history of how we entered the building, the way we got in, everything you found, that decision to occupy or not. When we occupied the building, it was literally leaking water down the entire building. So we had to sit and think, will we take this building or is it too much work? And in the end, we decided it was worth it. And we called upon a community of local people, and they came, and within 2 or 3 days, we had a functioning squatted centre that was for films and gigs and meetings and all sorts of things. And in this project called the Living School in 2016, I decided to play a game, which was to introduce people to that notion of how you squat a building. It's very simple. A building is empty. You need to go in, change the lock and take it. And there's a whole thing around private property and your right to be there in the possession of that. And so on the floor, similar to the floor plan Carolina is talking about, using bits of wood and some rubbish from the street, I created this floor plan of what an empty building might be like. And you can see there are kind of an attempt to be different rooms. So this might have been a bedroom, this might be the toilet. And so you can see me there doing this role play of asking people how we were going to get in, and they're outside of the building in this recreation. And then there was a very interesting moment where we did enter the building. We did a role play of the police coming, we did a role play of an angry landlord coming. But you could see everyone was in the building, and we were trying to make that decision of whether we would stay in that building based on what we found. So we found a bedroll and a can of drink, so we were concerned that maybe a homeless person was already in occupation of the building, and so would it be okay to squat that building? But the thing I want to talk about is, at one point in this discussion, one of the women stepped out of the building. So she left the building. She left the imaginary building, and it was a very interesting moment. And she said, "I just don't feel comfortable being in here. This is not my space." And it was a really amazing poetic moment where we were confronted with the power of kind of the imagination that property gives us, property rights and the kind of global regime of capital. That she, in this entirely false role play, stepped out because she wasn't comfortable to occupy. So I was just really interested in that moment, in that kind of that game playing, and how something very strong comes out just in this kind of very simple game. That was just one example I wanted to talk about. Because I think when we occupied the Haygate, it was a very important moment to say, although people are leaving, we are going to keep this open. We will keep this space a public space, public housing and public gardens. So I was very interested in that moment of how space is produced by this kind of colonization of our minds of capital, and should we be there, shouldn't we be there? And she very much proved, and there was a lovely conversation then around who has a right to occupy, and that produced a very good moment. Okay, that was just a very quick anecdote of that work. And then I wanted to move on to a different sense of property. So the first one, property, was like possession. So when you squat, eventually you will be thrown out because you don't have there's a legal possession made against you. You're not the owner reclaims possession. And so I want to think about property again, property number 2, as the property of, and to think about authenticity. And it comes back to what Carolina showed you was through Street View was the demolition of that estate. And what is there now is Elephant Park. It's a massive change demographic of the local area. It's sold around the world, overseas investors primarily buying into this brand new landscape. And those working class people have been displaced a long time ago. So I was thinking about this notion of the authenticity. Something being a property of something being authentic. And what you have now there is this place called Elephant Park. And it will be common to many of you when a thing is developed, suddenly the demographic changes, you see much more middle class people, much more kind of affected lifestyles are produced, a whole kind of sense of trying to produce a new community. And so when I was walking around with Carolina, we found suddenly this thing. And you'll also know from regeneration zones, suddenly all these things appear. This quality of thinginess. And I want to talk about this kind of thinginess. When you go to Elephant Park, you'll see what I like to call as like a regeneration bingo. If you had a bingo card, you can tick things off. So there's a temporary shopping mall now. There you can buy a kangaroo burger there. There's a new war memorial, and there's a whole question to me of like, why the hell have we gotten more and more war memorials? We're stuck in this past as we completely erase one particular past. And there's artistic pop-up shops as well. So it's literally like a regeneration bingo. And there's things here and there. And so we discovered, as we walked around, this monument, this kind of pointless monument. It's made from porphyry. It's a red stone. You may know the stone. Obviously, this is a black and white image. All you can really see is a bunch of blocks put upon each other and with text. And I was thinking about that authenticity as well, of how this lifestyle that is produced in these places, this sort of authentic lifestyle, this being, this very tasteful lifestyle, is completely reproduced in this kind of thing that is neither here nor there. And, like organic products, the whole place is like organically new, organic community, and it completely destroys what was there previously. So it's very much branded. And I was going to go through some of the branding that is on this monument, on this thing. So obviously it's very stark, it's a red stone, and it says, this is the text that you can read. Text number 1 says, porphyry was formed over 260 million years ago when volcanic magma cooled at varying rates to create layers of stone. So here, like your organic vegetables, the origin story is very important for you to buy. It says, imperial porphyry was discovered by the Romans, and due to its durability was used by emperors to build royal palaces, tombs and other monuments. I mean, these are incredible things to be putting in the landscape. Here you have the prestige, the emperors, the monuments. Each stone that you see was individually hand-picked. Like your vegetables, your bespoke vegetables now. This is, you have the origin, the prestige and the bespokeness. And then it says, the stone was transported from Italy across Europe by road, and then to sea to reach Elephant Park. And this is the bit I like the most. This is where the entire development is authenticated by something else. The stone used to build Elephant Springs was extracted from the Felipe family quarry, operated since 1945 in Albiano, northern Italy. And here you can see that text with a little map. And this is, I find this really extraordinary that they have to go to this, this length to say, these fantastic people. You can imagine these Italians from 1945 bringing their porphyry, and there it is. So that's the kind of thing. So we are in the realm of this kind of bourgeois taste of all the things emporiums could offer. Nothing is adulterated. It's all organic. It has an origin story. It's prestigious. Carolina told me about a book which I read, Richard Sennett's The Craftsman, and he talks about organic food as having this quality of purity and minimalism. I really think we see that in this thing monument. It's a monument that you really wonder, if it wasn't there, whether you would miss it. It's a very small announcement of the space, but if you walked by 2 minutes away, you wouldn't even see it. But the funny thing was, and this comes back to occupation and to property and possession, when we were looking at the monument, me and my friend the other day, a security guard came and they said, "What are you doing?" And we're like, "Well, we're looking at the thing. We're looking at the authentic thing." And she said, "When you're here, you have to be careful. You have to be careful when you're taking photos." And I was like, "Well, what do you mean?" And she said, "Well, it's private here. You just can't take photos." And then I pointed, I said, "But the monument has a QR code on it for you to photograph." And then she said again, "You have to be careful." And I was really struck by this. Like, before I used to go to Haygate, I wasn't careful. It was a whole community. It was good and bad. And now I have to go to this neighborhood I've been for 30 years and I have to be careful. And she was very polite. It's not a great job telling people like me that are annoying to be careful. So I'm very interested in this, like what has gone, the Haygate, and now we have this thing that you can go see. Literally, as they said, the tomb, the monument, the palace of empire. But it takes up the space that other people have been completely dispossessed from and unhoused from. That's all I really wanted to say. I think it was that's enough time for me. I hope that was interesting. That's the kind of way I approach things. But yeah, hopefully that was good. So we can move on to Felipe. Thank you all.
Thank you, Chris. That was very creative presentation. I like the slides in particular. Obviously, you touch again on many things very much related to history. I like this idea of that you put one past referring to the war memorial as opposed to another past, the one that we do want to remember. As we can come back to that in reference to the shopping center and the Haygate and the many things that we have lost in a physical way, and perhaps interesting to dig into how much it can remain regardless if the physical place the building is there or not. Yeah, so thank you for that. It's always interesting to elaborate and think. Yeah, and finally, yes.
Sorry, I wanted to say one thing. I think that is hilarious. What that this experience that you had with this stone, and I was thinking about authenticity. Sometimes takes, embodies authority. I think that there is a relation there between authenticity and authority. So, which material has the right, the authority of replace a lit space? I think that maybe that is a bit the point. So they say, we are replacing this lived space where a community used to live for this that is authentic, for example.
Spatial.
Yeah. Exactly. So, yes. So they needed, some thinginess, as you said, a thing that could make the weight of the inhabit. But, well, of course, it's a lie. But I wanted to say that only. Thank you, Chris, for your presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I haven't been. I mean, I used to go quite a lot when the Hagit was there, but then when it wasn't there anymore, I barely passed by, and it's so striking to see all those kind of sort of montage of this kind of hyper curated city, and even like there's no memory or there's no tradition. You have to sort of invent it in a way just to make it for it to make sense in a sort of to make it like a place someone would be interested in buying in. It's really, it has reached a degree it's really striking. But yeah, thanks for that.
Go ahead, Felipe, the floor is yours. I mean, I was just going to say that
Thank you.
if you want, that Felipe Lanuza is an architect at UCL and has also done research on, among many other things, on the Hagit. So
yeah, we'll talk about the Hagit actually. Let me just share my screen. Yeah, do you see it? And I'll ask you now if you can see the actual presentation, the slide. You see it well? Yeah, good. Yeah, as Santiago was saying, yeah, well, I did my PhD at UCL, but I'm an architect graduated from Chile, in the University of Chile, and then did my master's at the Catholic University of Chile, and then, long story short, I ended up in London, trying to investigate something that I started to explore back in Chile, back in Santiago. I'm not originally from Santiago, so kind of moving to study architecture to a different place, implied something in terms of exploring. So what you see here is the way in which through the digital overlay of photographs of a site, I convey a sense of absence of a place. In a way similar, you can experience it on site actually, as places that are abandoned or have like a slight occupation, but mostly silent, evoke imaginations, memories, echoes of what was or could have been there, or what could happen in such a place. So it's a way to come to terms to that kind of difficult to grasp feeling of absence. Yeah. So basically, just to contextualize what comes next in my presentation, what I'm showing you now is the photo of the disused railway territories in Santiago, Chile, where I first explored absence as a lens through which to approach the city. And while studying architecture, it struck me how those qualities of openness, of fullness, of different possibilities of use and interpretation of the space existed precisely where the presence of architecture and the city as designed and planned environments was not simply there.
Felipe,
yep.
Sorry to interrupt. Can you move your mic a bit, because it's just
like this?
Much better. Gracias.
Yeah, I wanted to avoid this, but I mean, if it's not too unpleasant, anyway. So yeah, basically, for an architect or an architect to be, it was striking to see that those places that were really exciting in the city, where those places where architects and planners were actually not really looking at or shaping. So for me, absence means to be away, or it means so etymologically. So in my research, it is a matter of distance, which can be spatial or away from a place, or temporal, away in time, past, future, memory, possibility. Which is okay. And yeah, layering is how I call this a sort of mode of representation I use to recreate that sense of absence, using experimental photography to grasp some understanding of those places and their role in the city. And the notion of terrain vague by the Spanish architectural theorist Ignacio de Sola Morales was a key reference for me, where he exposed the impossibility to recover the values of such landscapes using the traditional tools and approaches in architecture and planning. So moving to London, I expanded on the notion of absence to address a wider range of sites and situations, looking into processes of urban regeneration and how different forms of absence take place in cities and how to make sense of them. In other words, how can we read urban change through absence and represent it in a way different to how that change is narrated and represented by developers and authorities who ultimately decide and carry out such change. So basically this points out that Chris was talking about a minute ago. So I looked into 3 sites in South London, well linked to each other as corresponding to a specific phase in urban and social history, modernist planning and brutalist architecture from the second part of the 20th century, and now radically transformed as a part of a sort of regeneration wave affecting the whole city of London. So let's start with the Haygate. It was built in the 70s in the Elephant and Castle in South London. It was a council estate that came to replace a series of Victorian tenement buildings, which were in bad condition, apparently, inserting a radically different urban layout with generous open green spaces and well-illuminated, spacious and ventilated flats. The Haygate was demolished between 2011 and 14 approximately, and the new private development with much higher density and almost no social housing, or maybe Chris, you can correct me, perhaps no social housing at all. It's about to be completed now. And what the image shows is the actual, overlay of the 3 radically different urban layouts that, take place in the site, like in a time frame of 50 years, which is speaks about, absence in the form of erasure in the city, and how that's perhaps the most radical way of understanding absence. This sort of palimpsest, a way of, understanding it in a contrasting way. So the Haygate, the wonderful Haygate estate, was vacated. So during a decade or so, the residents were gradually forced to move away with no reasonable compensation, allowing the buildings and open areas to deteriorate, which was a process that started earlier on. Anyway, in the last years, only a few leaseholders remained in the estate, so the Haygate appeared like nearly empty, subtly occupied by nature. It turned into a silent garden, detached from its busy surroundings, as if it was suspended in its own time. In that condition, it allowed space for quiet contemplation and a series of informal activities. And in this period also, an active community of residents, activists, and supporters gave new uses and meanings to the estate, vindicating its social values and adapting the available space as plantations, a pop-up cinema, kart races, and many others. Other possibilities, sort of a display of the evidence of the possibilities of the site against the narratives and forces arguing for its failure and pushing for its demolition, implying the displacement of people and dismantling of established communities and support networks, gentrification and privatization of public land, and ultimately the environmental damage of demolishing to rebuild again from scratch. So bearing in mind that photography etymologically implies the writing or drawing of light, and that a photograph itself is a projection of the light of a past moment, the images I propose can be seen as palimpsests of light that recreate the environmental qualities of a place about to disappear. They represent it as an absence, a blurred and imprecise memory instead of a clear and fixed image of its former presence. This one is made of images of the border between the Hague and the city, marked by its high-rise buildings. And this one features or is made with photos surrounding the internal area of the state, where a dense wood was formed and mature trees had a greater presence, most of which were cut off to give way to the regeneration. The images interrogate the materiality of the city and its persistence in time, revealing the Haygate as an immaterial, vanishing ruin months before its complete demolition. Both compositions not only condense a situation of physical border in urban space, they also represent a border of the site in terms of its time, evoking a fading past and the sense of an uncertain future. So whilst the Haygate was still standing, there was always this kind of little hope that, I mean, things might turn like differently. But anyway, that didn't happen. And this image from 1972 shows how the site was before the construction of the Haygate, and I integrated it in this composition to acknowledge that reoccurrence of erasure and disappearance, the same situation just 40 years after. I extended the method of layering as a way to bring forward absence through a range of media. Here, the future representations of the Haygate as a project were subject to the agency of soil and rubbish collected from the site in its state of deterioration prior to demolition. So I'll just quickly go through, and perhaps more explanations or ideas can come during the conversation. I also used soil materials and so on collected from the site to build an architectural model of the Haygate and intervene it. Whilst the effect of the soil and materials fed with water would produce a less controlled agency in the project I was working on for the Haygate, I did this sort of experiment in early stages of the research, and I usually don't present it, but I thought that the use of a traditional mode of architectural representation of a site, the model making in this case, and to incorporate the agency of actual materials collected there in the creative process, I thought there was an opportunity for exploration and critique. The model brings together the representational and non-representational matter, shifting the creative potential of architectural ruins or urban voids to the realm of representation. And well, basically what happened with this is that they, after a few months, just stopped the work with this model, and I focused more on photography, and for the reasons I just left it, and the model dried up and remained on my desk for months and years, and intentionally it became a leftover, an unfinished project, and an oblique mirror of the site itself. So the model actually was there when the Haygate was demolished, and a couple of years after, I refocused on the model to engage with it as a site of absence itself. So the layered images of the model convey that absence as a concept cannot be like an absolute term of architectural design, let's say. Absence would be, I mean, thinking of absence as a value. We'll talk about, absence not as a value, as a production of urban regeneration, but later on we'll touch upon that. But absence in terms of, the positive elements of absence that you can experience on a site cannot be incorporated in architectural design, but as a sort of, openness to different degrees of allowing things that are not present for the designer in the brief or in anything that sort of, produces that designer to as a sort of, instrument or tool of a larger, power society to produce that space, if I'm making myself clear. Or this is perhaps clearer. It also makes us aware of the agencies and forces that shape the city working through us architects and force us to have a critical position. It may help also us to think of a city where the powers of presence of what gets built and established may be balanced and complemented and even counted through absence. I'll jump to Burgess Park. Further south from the Haygate, the park still retains traces of its layered formation and the previous existence of the site as a bustling industrial quarter. Nonetheless, most of its open green spaces and recently renovated facilities stand in the absence of old houses and factories. Being an aggregate result of incomplete erasures and unfinished projects, the park featured a series of loose ends, traces and fragments that did not correspond to an overarching scheme at work in the present, a desperate palimpsest to feed the urban memory and imagination, or in words of Chris, a happy accident. Basically, that kind of accidental formation of the site was its greatest value. So I'm referring to these leftovers. And these traces of the past contrasted with more formalized heritage objects that spoke of the city's history. Interesting also, but in a way framed by the present. which is taken to a ridiculous extreme in what was presented, this monument Chris talked about earlier on. So in the last years, Burgess Park has been subject to a revamp to bring, I quote, more coherence and legibility to the site. So many loose ends had added value to it as a vague park, in the words of Kambasinu, or the values of its mnemonic depth, as Sebastian Marot would say, were erased, leaving just these landmarks as a way to celebrate the site's history in a more limited and controlled way. Burgess Park had the Grand Surrey Canal running across it, and the atmosphere back then was quite different, literally due to the pollution and the agency of the water, which can be seen in these photos of about 100 years ago, showing how the air glows in the sun and how dense it became in a foggy day. I tried to recreate those qualities of ambience working through the photographs of the park in the present. And the sequence of these video snapshots focuses on one single point, where the photographer kneeled to take the picture on the right of the screen. So it was like a sequence of pictures, circling that point and trying to sort of chase that absent photographer taking that picture. And the same idea here in these series of pictures, like overlaid in a sequential way, and then in a reverse way on each side, as playing with time. And inspired by W.G. Siebold, I have to say, I went a bit further in trying to reveal the site's absent times and wrote a fictional text in which I blended the past and present of the park and its future in the form of an intervention that brings the presence of water along the trace of the canal, which is now like a path across the park. So along the sequence, I integrated archival photographs, material collected on site, as well as analytical and also project images. The text is written in first person, the experience of a rather confused guy who in one morning walks simultaneously across different times and situations and meeting people with whom he was sharing his present and other people from other times. So in a sense, sort of questioning the idea of fixed idea of past and future, but trying to blend everything in sort of imagined present. But whilst Burgess Park is flattened and smoothed over, the Aylesbury estate, one of the most ambitious council housing projects of the welfare state implemented in London, is being demolished. More or less the same story as the Haygate, but at a larger scale and due to be completed in 10 or 15 years from now. Burgess Park is witness to the simultaneous decay, demolition and regeneration of the Aylesbury, while at the same time, silently prompting it and chaining itself along to it. In turn, the looming absence of the Aylesbury echoes the homes cleared away to build the park. The last section of this presentation considers Burgess Park and the Aylesbury estate together. I argue absence is a relational aspect that comes forward in different ways in both sides, which helps us to understand how they're closely linked together from an experiential point of view, but also historically and as related planning operations in the context of urban regeneration. So this image shows both sides understood as a sort of seamless continuity. And if you look at the planning documents, Burgess Park's role for the whole regeneration of the Aylesbury had to do with increasing the land value. So basically, the improvement to the park was connected to the regeneration of the Aylesbury itself, even though it's not something that is like very evident across discussions and literature on the matter. So the construction of the Aylesbury estate and other projects in South London had to do with the provision of green areas in the Abercrombie Plan in 1943. So in a way, the park was related to the construction and both the construction and demolition of the Aylesbury. So I'm going to flip through images of this exhibition that I put together at the Bartlett School of Architecture in London. I used multi-layered videos, thoughts and impressions of local people, photographs and site-specific sounds and objects to build up a situated and embodied understanding of the current changes taking place in the area, which intends to be alternative and critical to the prominent market-driven narratives underpinning regeneration. So I'm aware I'm a bit over the time, so can I have like 1 minute just to point out a few things, and then I'll just flip through the rest of the slides. So basically, this composition was made with photographs taken during a public demonstration against the demolition and replacement of the Asbury in 2015. And the image both evokes the fragile and vulnerable condition of the state and its people, and also encompasses the tensions at play in the contested site. So these puddles are a way in which, from one side to, I mean, you can see the other. Like one side vanishing into the other, really. And yeah, a sequence of videos of one flat in the state and the park itself, and trying to sort of convey this relation, this future absence, to, on the one hand, point at the people forced to move away from the state, and where the park will be like a fragile memory, and the flat itself, you know, this kind of domestic space, sort of, you know, vanishing into the park, which is what is left, or what will be left, basically. And this piece, it's a series of alternating passages of unstructured or conversational interviews done to 3 people living around the study area who regularly visit Burgess Park. The interviews were done while walking around the park, but the interviewees could point at places and objects to address the questions asked by referring to places and objects at hand to the senses. So the sequence is laid out in 2 lines that hold coherence in a linear way, as well as holding an open dialogue with the other line, crossing the whole exhibition space. Only a limited amount of words can be read from one point. So basically you cannot read the sequence of text, but you sort of recreate like an open-ended relation between the paragraphs. And lastly, there was a soundscape, which is part of the exhibition, where sounds of the park and the flat kind of, you know, were integrated into the exhibition space. So the domestic life of the architecture school was basically merged, and sometimes, you know, tweeting birds, or, you know, the cracking sound of a wooden floor were kind of, you know, adding some sense of strangeness, and sort of bringing the places exhibited or discussed in the exhibition as a sort of, you know, absence through sound. So I think I'm going to leave it here. No conclusions, but conversation in the end. Just to acknowledge the end credits, and to say thank you in particular to Christian Albert for his support and collaboration with the Soundscape in the exhibition, and to Bernie de Vilat for her collaboration and support with the realization and design of the exhibition itself. Thank you, and sorry.
Thank you, Felipe. This was very interesting. Also, I found it very versatile how you mix the use of videos and photography, which was quite interesting. Also to understand this idea of absence. But maybe you can expand now when we open the discussion. As I said, I have too many notes, and it's a bit challenging to guide this discussion. But I'd like to invite you, obviously, for the dozen people or so that are still with us. Stick around for maybe 20 minutes that we're gonna have open the floor to questions. I'll just quickly invite you all 3, Carolina, Felipe, and Chris, to maybe take a step back from your experience and your practices, because there's a concept that Carolina said at the beginning, and she said, I'm also a citizen, and I'd like a very quick reflection. If you were to analyze this idea of a heavy history, a heavy past, and maybe the idea of urban memory and how to inhabit a place. It could be in the former Haygate, the shopping center, or the houses that we've seen in Santiago in Chile. As a citizen, what would be your take, if that makes sense for whoever? Like, how would you feel that experience with maybe like a blank page, if that makes sense, without all the bias that you have and your research that you have? What do you think that anyone, a lay person, would feel by walking around these places?
I mean, I take students around these places all the time who have no idea what was there. They've never been to the Elephant, they've never heard of the Haygate, and they've never been to the shopping centre. And it's very interesting because then you have to say, this is completely abstract for you, and what I'm saying is very partisan, but to recognise that what they see, they might actually like it. And that's really interesting. That's a really nice conversation when we're looking at kangaroo burger shops and whatever, Pilates studio. Maybe that's for them, it's cool. And I think that's a very interesting conversation around this production of subjectivity in these spaces. And obviously, I'm there like puking up in the corner and they find it very funny, but it's a great conversation to have with them because you can't assume that they look at it and think it's all awful. So I don't know. So there is a kind of, you do start again, and it's also a learning experience for me. That's the pedagogy of how I learn too. That is the dialogue. Yeah, maybe that makes some kind of sense. But yeah.
It's quite difficult because in a way the job is well done on their side. Basically there's no conflict. There's nothing left but this kind of entire new reality, which people just meet there, and unless you have a connection to the site's history, or you know about it, or you have lived there before, like your case, Chris, it's very difficult to really understand. And you look for traces, and you're curious, but still you cannot grasp the whole transformation that took place there, and what that implied to, for people living in their communities that were kind of, just split across London and beyond. So it's difficult to be a citizen where the city is being curated and sort of, manipulated in such a way. And of course, I'm curious about the kangaroo burgers now. So it's these things sort of, are kind of attractive, and in a way they add something which can be interesting for people, but it's quite difficult. So I think the role there, I'm less of an activist and more of an observant, or perhaps an archivist. And in this way, I share Carolina's line of thinking in terms of the importance of building archives, building narratives, and making them present, even though you have to make an absence present in some way. You cannot experience what is absent but through absence. So having that in mind to really convey what is not there, and to bring it back somehow, not only in a nostalgic way, but also in a critical and creative way. And perhaps not to dislike the kangaroo burgers, but at least to be aware of what's behind that burger being served there. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, in my case, I will not talk about Haygate, but for example, in my neighborhood, what happened to me very often, and I imagine that for other citizens must be very similar, is that I'm walking around and suddenly some building has been demolished, and I said, oh my God, I don't remember what was there. And this happens to me all the time, like very, very often. And I don't know, in Chile, the pandemic was really strong in the way that we stood like 7 months unclosed. And many things change in the city. And also we move around mostly in metro, the subway. So we don't get the chance to really look the city, to walk around the city. Also because our jobs sometimes takes most of our time. So, and this is, I think that is a very dangerous thing, because to walk around the city, all this exercise that we made with Chris, for example, in London, in Elephant and Castle, is a sort of exercise of appropriation. When you walk around, you know the places, the houses, how it's composed, and you can be more aware when something is knocked down, for example. So there is a thing, and I don't know, it's something very silent, but it's like an uneasiness, but it's like something is happening very fast and it's really out of your reach to have an opinion or I don't know, an influence or something about what is happening over there. So yes, I think that is like a memory lost in a way. So all these houses are being knocked down, and even if you were never really attached to that house, you know in a way that is changing your lifestyle, in a way it's changing your I don't know, your surrounding, your relation to, or the way even that you inhabit. Yes.
Thank you. We have 10 minutes or so left, and I would like to hear from other people as well, other than Felipe, Chris, Carolina, and myself, to make it more of a conversation. So people, if you have any questions, feel free to put your camera on, or any comments. Don't be shy. No one? I do have
maybe on the Facebook channel there are some questions.
There we go.
Hi, thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, so inspiring listening to all your presentations. Thank you again. So thinking of how the, like Chris, you mentioned earlier, and I mean all three presenters mentioned about the production of subjectivity in spaces, and how does it affect this production of subjectivity, and how like the body moving space is the movement is shaped by space. I am just thinking, and in relation to Chris, you used like role play with participants, and Carolina, you use also with participatory engagements within TATE, working with the paper breaks from like kind of this kind of practical workshops. I wonder, are there more like ways for creating this kind of participatory workshops for individuals who are not researchers, who are like citizens, to get to experience and to like gain new knowledge in the practical way through those workshops, or like other workshops you have known from like your research?
I mean, I can say very briefly how bizarre the experience of the group I'm involved with, locally active, is called Southern Notes. That's been going for about 15 years, and we've always done walks around the elephant. So they were walks just like anti-gentrification walks to show people what was coming, to stand in front of buildings that would be demolished. So it's absolutely bizarre to keep now, 15 years later, take students around where there's no Haygate and there's no shopping centre. But how still in that landscape it's possible, through kind of anecdote and the kind of tragedy and the comedy of it all. I always tell jokes about it a lot, because although you could be completely broken by what's happened to that neighborhood, there is something funny and resilient in it. So it's still interesting to stand in certain places and make these comments, even though you can't see these things. It does make the place alive. I finished the walk always at a site that is exactly the spot where the last leaseholder, Adrian, was evicted. He was the only person actually evicted by the police and bailiffs. We stand there, and you're right by boutiques and new housing, but I show the image of him being carried over his doorstep, a literal dispossession, that moment of the legal dispossession. It's a very moving time to end on, to talk about this is the violence of that process. And yet we're standing literally where I had stood many times on his front doorstep talking to him. So no, there is something very nice about that kind of role playing and participatory thing, and just bringing anecdotes, I think. in an abstract space.
I think it makes sense as a sort of, reenactment, not having done that kind of, workshops or participatory, activities like in the subject. It's I think you learn about something, I mean, more effectively if you play it rather than just listening to it in a way. And also, I mean, the anecdotes or the guided walks. Yeah, I think there's something to, I mean, to say about something about it in a way. It's to tell a story and to bring it down, to pin it down in some way. Yeah, it's strange, but I think that the playing and also this kind of guided conversations in a site about something that was there or wasn't there, or could be there, is an effective way of learning. And for the people leading it, I did a few in Burgessburg. It's also like a way of relearning the story, and it never comes out the same way. It's funny.
Well, for me, sometimes it's really difficult, the English. So I don't know if I understood very well what you said, Ada. Well, the workshop that I did at TATE was addressed to citizens. That was a really nice part of this, because I wanted to connect, for example, with the people that used to live in Elephant Castle. And that's why for me it was very important, for example, to talk with Chris. Yes, sorry, can you repeat your?
Oh, I think I am just curious about, have you done other workshops in relation to like using participatory like a method in your practice? Yeah.
So yes, my methods, I think that it's always to set up some a space layout and some object that you can interact with. I think that the interaction is a really important part of it. It's like you set up a sort of engine. So, and then this engine is for the participant that has to switch on, this engine and to play with this. So it's really, you only set up a start point, really. And then everything that happens afterward, it depends on people, how people, I don't know, engage, for example, with these experiences. And I think that, well, that we have different names to call it. For example, I like this thinginess that Chris talked about. I think that when we, I don't know, address to an issue through things, through touching, through walking, is completely different. It's really another channel. So for me, the intellectual channel is okay, but I think that we need more of this other channel, because we have so many ways of learning, really. So the intellectual channel is really something that we use too much, maybe. So I think that maybe touching and walking around is more effective in the sense that you engage, in a different way. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that reminds me of architect Simon Nicholson talk about in the loose parts of creating more variables in the environment to provide like more possibilities for people, especially kids, to engage with the space and to be playful. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ada. If I may, you just make me think of when you talk about reenacting and playing. and relating to redevelopments. Interestingly, most of these places must provide open spaces and green spaces, and they often, due to the magnitude of the development, and often developers either in the initial application completely run away from the obligations of a playground for mainly for children, or they offer these what's called the payment in lieu, which is basically, let's say, a fine for not providing, which is a basic right for kids to play. And now in the Elephant, we have at the Elephant Park side, which is where the Haygate used to be, this no park, or this private park, like Chris say, with CCTV and guards all over. And then on what will be the new site where the shopping center used to be, again, the promise of a park has been, because it's a much bigger site with housing as well, has been avoided due to these negotiations with, we must say as well, the local authorities. So the council that is obviously complicit in a sense of these developments. So interestingly, there's less and less physical space, green space, not only for children to play, but also for us to reenact and play and host carnivals and host activities that will raise this awareness, because often as a charity as well, we struggle to find physical space in the area to bring about like these either walking tours or exhibitions that obviously we have spaces like TATE, South London Gallery and Gasworks, which are amazing, but we really like to have them at the heart of the community, and ironically is less possible.
Yeah. Yes, can I say one thing? This reminds me of what the Chris experienced, you know, with the squatting exercise, when the woman says, I think that I don't belong here. I don't have the right to be here. That is really strong, and you call that like how they colonize the mind, because I think that I saw this park that they built, you know, where Haygate State used to be, and okay, it's an open space, but I think that is, in a way, is with the same feeling. I don't have the right of being here. I don't have the liberty of do whatever I want, and actually is effectively is like that. That's why this guard asked to Chris what he was doing. So I think that one thing is to create parks. You have a lot of parks in London, I think. It's amazing parks. It's such a privilege, I think. We need more parks in Santiago. But it's not only the park, it's how the park relates to the community. So how the park was set up, which kind of invisible rules put to the use and to share. So yes, I think that this is still, this park in Elephant and Castle is still like, I don't know, forbidden place in a way. Is similar to Chilean public space. Most of the time we don't feel that we have the right to be there, like in a free way. Yes.
If I may add this, those projects are, reductive in every single possible sense. And one thing that Ada was mentioning, the element of play, I think it's for example what Burgess Park had in the past, and not so much now, but there's still some traces, is that kind of, you know, incompleteness and, you know, full of things that were like just strange, and then that kind of, you know, playful engagement with those things. When I was little, I used to play like not in the actual playground, but, you know, elsewhere where the foundations of houses to be built were kind of, you know, coming up, and all that kind of, you know, free play in free spaces had to do with, you know, the reappropriation of structures that were there perhaps for a reason, but are now, you know, just left over. And that kind of richness that Burgess Park had is now, you know, overly framed and you know, flattened in a way. And so that kind of, you know, flattening, I think it's echoes how these redevelopments sort of, you know, flatten the city, and they turn it into sort of, you know, like an overarching narrative. where there's a monument telling you like the story, made up for the place to make sense, and you cannot even approach it without, having to be careful or not doing anything wrong. Like it's that kind of restriction has to do with how the city is thought as to be made like in the mind of people, and I mean the developers and authorities, which is worrying. I think less playfulness.
And you mentioned Burgess, if I may, the sad thing is that a couple of years, even before the pandemic, there was a ban introduced for the barbecues that really gave life to that park. The barbecue culture of Burgess was quite unique. Yes. Very praised also by food critics, even that write about how parks are also sort of places for people to gather around food, and this ban is still in place, so people can no longer host barbecues there, and this was very much a place for the Latin American and other Black communities, Black and brown communities in Southern. I'm sure Chris is nodding, is very much part of this culture, and we wonder, even in these very street spaces, if we're being limited. What else is left? No, that question came to mind. Will this squatting experience that Chris was describing still possible these days?
It's really hard, isn't it? In London, like I come from the squatting movement where there were thousands of squats in London, and the criminalisation in 2012 totally destroyed that. I mean, people still squat, people still occupy. People were occupying the barbecue pits and going fuck it and having barbecues anyway, because they thought it was their right to do so, because it didn't make any sense to keep it contained. So yeah, I mean, that is the barbecue is, you're right, a great occupation of public space. It's absolutely amazing. It's commented upon by loads of people.
I'm conscious of time. Maybe we have time for one last question or comments or closing remarks. Anyone else or wants to add or ask anything? Or maybe Felipe, Carolina, and Chris have a very, very, very short conclusion or
Hi. Hello, guys. Yes, I working before with the guys with the elephant for the Latin elephant community. I working before in one presentation, artistic presentation. I'm Joshua. I representation the Latin American artists of London, in the Federation of Artists. And to be honest, the space for practice culture and elephant in the area in the South London is very, very difficult for find one space for practice culture in the parks. And like I listen in this today, we have struggled many problems for find a space for practice. What we do, it's like dances. The community Latin American is very, very important for this. So I think it's very important looking in this problematic in every council. I'm thinking, because the practice of dance of something artistic is very important for the community. And after the COVID, I think it's one like mental issues for all the community. So just in my experience, I say I have very many problems with the groups as part of the federation. They always try to practice in Burgers Park, is the central of the Latin American community. And the guards, the software coming and they prohibit use of the speakers, for example. And it's because the park don't have a space for practice this kind of the activities. So they practice in the corridors or in the parks, use the childs or maybe the circulation. So it's very, very big problem in all London. I know we have big parks, but maybe they forget the aspect for practice, the culture and sport. Of course, they have space, but for the culture and specific, they don't have this kind of this. We work with the software council, like the federation. The last year we making one festival. It's the Vibra Latina is the name. The first time last year we making with the software. This work because the people started to understand, the authorities understand that we need this space. So this kind of the meetings is very important for recognizing that in all aspects. And like we are artists and we need this space for show how preserve the Latin American culture on all the culture and show the new generations, the childs, good activities and collaborate with the, you know, with the society for making more good society around these parks and these areas. So very nice intervention, and I like to participate more in these activities. Thank you so much for the invitation for the Latin American community and the artists. Yeah, keep in touch in that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Joselyne. Since you mentioned other activities, I'd like to remind the people before you go and we wrap up that we have, this is part of many talks, conversations, and part of the public program that we are presenting since last year, and it will go on during 2022. The next one we have is called Lithic Encounters by Paola Vascon at the South London Gallery. That's going to happen on the 21st of May. That's a Saturday at 11:30, 1 p.m., 2:30 to 4. Keep an eye on our social media at Latin Elephant. And the second one is called Mutant Architecture and Unlikely Animals by Amalia Pica, and it will be at the Walworth Library, which is around the corner from the Elephant. That's on Saturday, the 20th of May, again from 11:30 to 4. Check the times on our social media. Yes, any final remarks? And we can wrap up a very interesting.
I want to sorry, Chris, go ahead. No, I wanted to say thank you. For me, it has been such an inspiring and rich process to meet Joselyne, to meet Chris, to meet Felipe, and now you, Santiago. Yes, to share what you are working with since quite a while. Yes, so all those walks with Chris around Elephant Castle was really something, I don't know, enriching for my work and for my, I don't know, experience as a citizen. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I would extend massive appreciation to Latin Elephant, like the depth of commitment to that community and the work that you all do is incredible. Like, it's a kind of subtly political work that can't be, but it is very intensely political. So I'm really appreciative of everybody. And it's nice to see this cultural programming too, and these critical questions around the role of art as well. And also thanks to Felipe and Carolina, I'd never met before, and it would be, I really wish we could all be in Burgess Park together or the Elephant having a coffee, but I'm sure something will happen. And thanks to everyone for coming. It's been really, really lovely to do this. So yeah, I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Also, thank you on my side to Carolina for first getting in touch in regards to this, and to Chris, Joselyne, and everyone for putting this together. Really happy to having presented here and to enjoy and join in the discussions. Yeah, just one thought to finalize that Burgess Park. One of the things that was very good to see in a way was that those leftover streets that were not erased and that were just left there, they were actually used for people to practice their choreographies and dancing. And that was, I mean, the leftovers in Burgess Park are not only a way of engaging with the site's history and past, but also they have like a present role, and that kind of spontaneity that comes up in, that used to come up in that kind of place is, I mean, it's a really pity to lose it. So if occupying now is really to use a street for practicing choreography or some dancing, well, go for it, and count me in for that. So.
Well, thank you, Carolina, Chris, and Felipe, this was, and everyone who attended today, this was recorded live on Facebook. So this will come up on Latin Elephant's Facebook a few minutes after we finish. So you can happily share and comment with others who have missed it. We finally, a quick thank you to obviously the Arts Council who's funded this program, Gasworks, South London Gallery and TATE. Keep an eye, as I said, on our social media for future events. And yeah, like Chris said, I wish we were all, physically there to continue this conversation off the camera with some coffee or a few pints and hopefully one day. Thanks very much, and for more appropriation of public spaces.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.